Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Dark and Precious Storytime. I'm Dark.
And I'm Precious.
In this podcast, we flex our creative muscles and maybe your patience by narrating original stories complete with totally professional sound effects. This will be the best 30 minutes of your life you'll never get back. Today's episode is called Deer Season, where an unsuspecting hunter battles for his life as woodland creatures redefine the term hunting season in sinister new ways. Darrell Franklin had always loved hunting. He'd started going with his father as a child, and then by himself as he got older. Over the course of 20 years, he developed into a skilled and conscientious hunter. He was always able to bag his limit, but never targeted animals unless it was a sure one-shot kill. He and his dad had worked one summer to build a sturdy deer blind high up in the fork of a huge elm, and over the years, Darrell had made slight additions and modifications to it. It provided good coverage from the elements, but was open enough to provide Darrell an almost 360-degree view of the surrounding woods, and had always been a peaceful retreat. This year, however, Darrell was only tense and wary. It was normally his favorite time of the morning, right before dawn, when the sky had lightened enough for him to see through the trees, but still dark enough to provide cover for the smaller woodland creatures rustling through the underbrush in search of food.
Who's Russell?
Today, there weren't many creatures moving around, and the forest was quiet, except for the occasional bird call.
Caw-caw, caw-caw.
As he ruminated on the circumstances that led him to sitting in his deer blind with a more powerful rifle and more ammunition than he typically carried for a deer hunting trip. A few weeks prior, rumors of a new kind of predator in the area began circulating in the community. At first, people had reported finding partially eaten carcasses of squirrels and rabbits, raccoons and turkeys. Soon after, a few larger mammals like foxes and even a wild boar turned up. But it wasn't until a forest ranger discovered the mutilated corpse of a black bear that people began to get worried. And it wasn't as much the number of carcasses that caused concern, but the oddly messy condition of the animals' bodies, as if the predator's goal had been to eviscerate and destroy rather than simply feed. Darrell heard the ranger had taken leave of absence because he'd been so traumatized at the sight of the bear's body. One night, Darrell joined a group of men huddled over beers at the town bar. These were local hunters who had tried to track whatever animal had killed the bear. They had been unsuccessful and instead returned confused and more than a little frightened. One of the hunters, Jim, confided in Darrell that there had been an abnormally large herd of deer in the area near the bear's carcass, and they were acting strangely.
To be or not to be?
Rather than bounding off through the trees as they normally did at the sight of humans, these animals just stood there, watching the men wander through the woods, searching for tracks. It was odd enough the deer weren't skittish at all, standing their ground when a human passed within a few feet of them. But the most unsettling aspect was how, when a man would get too far from the group, the deer would move to surround him, as if they were trying to cut him off from escape. Once the men noticed the deer appeared to be almost stalking them. They tried waving their arms and running at the deer, but the animals didn't flinch. Other than the occasional twitch of a tail or ear, the deer stood still. It wasn't until one of the hunters fired a rifle that the deer quickly dispersed into the forest. All the men in the bar were veteran hunters, and it was sobering to see them so noticeably shaken. At the end of the evening, as Darrell prepared to leave, Jim made an offhand remark that sent chills down Darrell's spine. Of all the animal corpses the hunting party had found, and there had been dozens, not a single one had been a deer. Darrell was turning this conversation over in his mind when he heard the frantic scurrying sounds in the underbrush nearby, and looked down to see a couple of rabbits leap from the bushes.
Ta-da!
They weren't zigzagging back and forth, but running in a straight line. Darrell leaned forward to see what they were running from. A large doe bounded out of the foliage and stopped for a moment. Normally, a deer would bob its head, scanning the environment, and then tentatively pick its way through the bushes. This one was breathing heavily and lifted its nose in the air, pulling in quick whiffs, and then dashed in the same direction the rabbits had gone. Darrell began to grow uneasy. The deer's mouth had been rimmed with bright red, and there had been smears of red on its brown hide, all of which looked suspiciously like blood. He sat a while longer, listening to the woods grow silent around the frenetic rustling.
Who's Russell?
As more light pushed into the gloom, he could see the brown of the deer zipping back and forth through the trees, obviously chasing something.
Zzz.
Suddenly, one of the rabbits sped out from behind a tree, and Darrell gasped as the deer erupted from the bushes
Pew!
next to the rabbit and knocked it sprawling, then pounced and pinned the smaller animal to the ground. The rabbit shrieked as the deer shoved its muzzle into its belly,
Ah, my belly!
ripping into it and cutting off the screams. Darrell gaped in horror
The horror!
as the deer began eating the rabbit with loud crunching and tearing noises.
Deer.
Having never seen this behavior in a deer before, Darrell's curiosity overcame his fear, and he shifted forward to watch the deer better. The tree stand creaked a little, and the deer froze, whipping its head up at the sound. Blood and meat dripped from its mouth as it scanned around for the source of the sound. It tilted its nose up to sniff the air, and Darrell's heart stopped as it turned and stared straight at him. Darrell slowly lifted his rifle, peering through the scope to get a closer look at the deer. It just stood there, chewing on a piece of rabbit and watching him. Darrell was amazed to see the deer's lips pull back from abnormally large, sharp teeth as it dipped its head to the bloody meal again. He sat there, stunned.
Huh.
What would cause something like this? Some weird mutation? Rabies? Whatever it was terrifying to think of something with a deer's agility and speed actually being a predator. Thinking he could help solve the mystery if he brought the creature in, he settled the crosshairs of his scope on the deer's chest, took a breath, then pulled the trigger. The loud bang
Bang!
startled the deer, but not before the bullet entered its chest and stopped its heart. It leaped upwards once and then collapsed into a heap next to the rabbit's scattered remains.
Click.
Darrell made his way down from the tree stand and over to the dead animals. He knelt down and shook his head in disbelief. The deer's teeth were even more frightening up close, all pointed and sharp with long, canine-like incisors. He lashed the deer's rear legs together, intending to drag it to his truck, but froze a moment later at another rustle nearby.
Who is this guy?
He glimpsed a tawny hide and dark eyes through the branches of a nearby deadfall. Another deer was watching him. Darrell sat still, watching as the deer stepped out. He turned pale as he saw this one's mouth was also stained red and bulging with sharp teeth. He snatched his rifle and stood quickly, hoping a sudden movement would startle the deer. But instead of dashing away, it lowered its head and took a step forward.
Ruh-roh.
2 more deer appeared in his periphery, silent as ghosts. All 3 animals were staring intently at him, and he could hear more rustling to his left.
That Russell guy again.
Suddenly, he was acutely aware of how exposed he really was. The deer continued to regard Darrell silently, and he could hear them all sniffing the air, sniffing him. He started moving backwards, slowly, keeping the 3 deer in sight. He shouted and flailed his arms,
Ah!
but they didn't move. It was only a few yards to his stand, so he glanced behind him and stopped with a gasp, heart pounding in his chest.
Thump, 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 thump.
A large 12-point buck stood between him and his tree stand. Unlike the other, sleeker deer, the buck's hide was etched with deep scratches, most of which was scabbed over, but there were also a few fresh ones. There was a scar bisecting one side of its face, including the socket where its left eye had been. Obviously, this beast had been in a fight, or several. Darrell noticed with astonishment most of the horns in the buck's antler rack were broken off or stained red, as if it had gored something. Darrell raised his rifle, this time not bothering to breathe, centered the crosshair on the buck's forehead only a few feet away, and pulled the trigger. The buck grunted and leaped away, giving Daryl an opening to sprint towards his tree stand. He tried to ignore the light thudding of deer's hooves as they pounced towards him. He lurched up the ladder, climbing faster than he ever had. About halfway up, something crashed against his foot, knocking it off the ladder rung. For a heart-stopping moment, he dangled by one hand and looked down to see 3 deer launching themselves up towards him, nipping at his boots. Their teeth made loud clacking sounds as they bit through the air a couple of inches from his foot. Terrified, Daryl swung himself back onto the ladder, pulling himself up and into the blind, where he collapsed onto his back, wheezing for air. After a few minutes, he caught his breath and risked a peek over the edge. The deer were gone, and the trees were still. The hunters earlier had agreed as a group to carry walkie-talkies this year in case something happened. So Daryl grunted in relief as he remembered this and reached for his walkie-talkie, intending to warn his fellow hunters. But it was no longer clipped to his belt. Frantically, he searched his pockets and the floor of the perch, and his heart sank when he looked back over the edge and spied the jaunty yellow case of the little radio on the ground, a few feet from the deer he'd just killed. He groaned in frustration and pulled his cell phone out of his pocket. But, as expected, there was no service in this area, which is why they had agreed on the radios in the first place. After a quick look around to make sure there weren't any deer, he began to climb back down the ladder. Holding his rifle tightly, he moved quickly over to the carcass and retrieved his radio, and then dragged the deer back towards the stand, head swiveling for threats. Once he'd bounded back up the ladder and into the blind, he'd clicked the radio, calling for his friends.
Hello?
A cold terror grew in his stomach as he continuously switched channels, trying to raise any of the hunters nearest to him. Daryl tried to convince himself that not all the hunters kept their walkie-talkies turned on, and some probably neglected to take them in the first place. But as he tried to calm himself, a shot echoed through the trees, and he jumped. It sounded like it come from his left, which would probably be a man named Clarence. Daryl quickly turned to Clarence's channel, stammering in a low voice about what he'd seen, and warning Clarence to stay in his blind. He knew it sounded crazy, but he didn't care. He'd happily accept any ridicule if he and the others made it out of the forest alive today. After no response, though, he repeated the message a few times over the next several minutes until his radio erupted with a frantic babbling that coincided with another shot, this one a little closer. Daryl's heart thudded as he leaned in to listen to Clarence's terrified voice. Although it was mostly incoherent, he picked up a couple of words: deer and teeth. Then 2 more shots followed in rapid succession, and Daryl began hearing screaming in the distance. He tried raising Clarence on the radio, but there was only silence now. Surely someone else had heard the shots and screaming, so he cycled again through the radio channels, but still received no responses. Suddenly, he was angry. He didn't know why the deer were now attacking people, but it sounded like they'd gotten Clarence, and he'd be damned if he was going to be their next meal. So he rested the rifle on the little bench and searched the surrounding woods slowly for signs of deer. Satisfied that there weren't any close by, he grabbed his rifle and quickly climbed down from the tree stand. Once his feet were on the ground, he grabbed the hooves of the deer carcass. It seemed more important than ever to bring back proof of what was going on. He lurched toward his truck, dragging the carcass. As he ran, he heard another faint scream.
Help me!
And he stopped, cocking his head. This one had come from the other direction and had sounded human. Daryl whirled toward the sound and took a few steps in that direction when another screech of pain cut off the shouts.
Ow! Owie, owie, owie.
He turned and began running again, but a decade of eating junk food and drinking beer quickly caught up to him, and soon his legs and shoulders and arms ached from dragging the animal, He forced himself to keep moving, clutching at a painful stitch in his side and berating himself for not living a healthier lifestyle.
Goddamn Doritos.
He began hearing furtive rustling sounds around him.
Does anybody know who this guy is?
And he imagined a herd of carnivorous deer stalking him, so he pushed himself, staggering and lurching, until he could see his truck parked in a small clearing. As he grew nearer, he glimpsed movement to his right and turned to see a couple of deer keeping pace with him. They bounced and glided easily through the brush about 50 feet away, watching him closely. He considered shooting at them, but didn't want to take the time to stop. He just wanted to get inside his truck and get the fuck out of here. But his feet betrayed him and he tripped, sprawling onto the hard-packed trail and skinning his hands. What little breath he had left whooshed out of him. Wheezing, he pushed himself over and stared at the sky, a brilliant, cheerful blue that seemed to taunt him. He struggled to his hands and knees, reaching for his rifle when something smashed into him, launching him into the air. Darrell flew for several feet and slammed to the ground, losing whatever air he'd managed to recover in a breathless little shriek of surprise.
Surprise!
But adrenaline surged through his system and he lurched to his feet. There was searing pain along the left side of his body, and he felt a warm flow of blood from several gouges in his leg, shoulder, and arm. He looked down to see that his coat was shredded on the left side and was quickly turning red with his blood. He heard a snap and looked up, shouting in amazement.
Amazing!
The large buck he'd shot in the head earlier stood a few yards away. His bullet had gouged a furrow in the animal's skull, and the blood had dripped down the side of its head, making it look gruesome and even more menacing. Darrell's foot felt something hard on the ground as he backed up, and he glanced down at a fist-sized rock. He stooped quickly to pick it up, groaning as his wounds pulled open more.
Oh.
As he straightened, the buck leaped forward, deadly antlers aimed straight for Darrell. The man threw himself sideways and then shuffled back toward his gun, alternating a wary eye between the buck and the other deer. But it looked like they were just watching. His rifle was on the ground near the deer corpse, and he was near enough to pick it up, but the buck began stamping the ground
Stomp, stomp.
and lowered its head for another charge. Enraged, Darrell reared back and threw the rock in his hand as hard as he could. Both he and the deer were surprised at the accuracy of the throw, as the rock slammed solidly into the buck's forehead with a loud thunk.
Thunk.
The stunned animal staggered backward, giving Darrell enough time to scoop up the rifle and shoot it again. But there was a dry click as he yanked the trigger. Cursing, he worked the bolt, pulling it back to eject the empty casing and loading a live round just as the deer lunged forward again, this time leading with its ridiculously sharp teeth. Darrell fired point-blank into the creature's face. The bullet slammed into its head, killing it instantly. But its momentum caused it to plow into Darrell, bowling him over again. And again, Darrell's breath rushed out of him,
Whoosh.
and he lay there gasping for air. Movement nearby caught his attention, and he groaned as several other deer began edging closer to him.
No!
The dead buck had collapsed onto Darrell's legs, and he shoved at it, cursing him again for not going to the gym like ever.
Oh, so stupid.
He worked the bolt on his rifle frantically again and aimed at the nearest deer, shooting it in the chest. It staggered briefly, then caught its footing and bounded away into the woods. The sound of the shot caused the others to flinch and hop further away, but they were still watching him with that unnerving calmness. Darrell finally managed to work his way out from under the dead animal and stood up. He immediately felt lightheaded and realized he could very well die here if he passed out. He took a couple of deep breaths and considered trying to load the buck into his truck, but he knew it was far too heavy and the other deer would take him down if he stayed much longer. He took out his phone and snapped several pictures of the beast, then dragged the other smaller deer corpse the last distance to his truck, pausing occasionally to catch his breath. The carcass was heavy, but Darrell managed to heave it into the bed of his truck, stopping frequently to catch his breath. Blood ran freely from his wounds, and he was constantly lightheaded now. He knew if he didn't get help soon, he would pass out and possibly bleed to death. With a final burst of effort, he opened the driver's door, threw the rifle on the passenger seat, and lunged in after it, sobbing in relief as he closed the door. He looked up while he fumbled with the key and stopped in amazement. The deer were moving forward as a group from the trees. They stopped where the big buck lay, surrounded it, then dipped their heads and began feeding on it, ripping strands of meat from the still warm corpse. Dell sat in disbelief for a moment, then started the truck with a roar and wheeled it in a circle, pelting the feeding deer with dirt and gravel as he fish-tailed his way to the small road leading out of the forest. Hopefully he'd stay conscious enough to get to safety. A few days later, the newspaper ran a story about a local hunter who'd been gored by a buck and barely made it out of the woods alive. A passing state trooper had found the hunter unconscious behind the wheel of his pickup and called an ambulance. When he awoke, the hunter claimed a herd of vicious meat-eating deer had stalked him and tried to eat him. He even claimed to have killed one of them and brought it back as proof. However, the carcass was never found, and his claims were soon dismissed as the hysterical rantings of an out-of-shape hunter with an overactive imagination. Attention soon turned back to the more serious matter, the several hunters who had mysteriously disappeared in the area. The end.
The end.
What's that?
Because you didn't have that. You didn't have that. That end.
Well, you were complaining that I didn't have an end.
Well, I didn't complain. I just asked you. I just said something about it like a week ago or 2 weeks ago.
Well, I thought that maybe still left it a little ambiguous, but not quite as ambiguous, and tied it up a little better.
Okay.
Yeah?
Okay.
Yes.
But like carnivorous deer, really? You see how cute the deer are in the backyard?
I know, that's why I was thinking, like, wouldn't it be funny if they turned out to be carnivorous?
That would not be funny at all.
No. But I was just thinking that, like they are very, agile, and they're so graceful and fast, and like their whole survival mechanism is like how fast and agile they are, because they can run from prey, right? Well, or, they can hurdle themselves into cars really well.
Oh, we know that from experience.
But I was thinking, like, how bad would it be if something that was that agile and that athletic and fast and everything decided it was going to eat things rather than run away from things?
Yeah, that would be a little scary.
I know.
It would definitely change my evening habit of sitting out and watching the deer.
Yeah. I might sit out and watch them with a gun. But, yeah, I thought that was an interesting perspective to look at it.
Okay. So then what's the next story going to be about?
I don't know. You're lucky you got this one out of me.
Oh my God, I know.
I don't know, maybe aliens? Or...
aliens would be cool.
I don't know. I'm getting kind of tired of coming up with all the ideas myself. I was hoping that maybe some of our listeners who listen to our stuff...
Like all three of them?
All three or 5 of them or something, I don't know. Maybe one of them would come up with an idea of stuff we could do. I've actually already implemented one idea into one of our previous stories, so there's that. It does happen.
Yeah, I come up with ideas all the time, but do you listen? No.
Well, I'm looking for good ideas.
Hey, they were good ideas.
Okay.
You just shut your cake hole.
What was the last good idea you gave me?
There were so many.
Just name one.
There were so many. I don't know. I had talked about vampires and aliens and Mothman and Land Otter Man.
Land Otter Man.
We already did a Bigfoot one.
Well, I know we did a Bigfoot one. We did a vampire one.
We did do a vampire one.
Maybe alien one. I said maybe the next one could be an alien.
Right. We could do one about demon spiders.
Demon spiders? Listen, lady, I've already done flying, flaming piranhas. So, demon spiders...
Not nearly the same thing.
I think demon spiders sounds a little derivative.
I don't think so.
Demon spiders. I don't... What?
You could do kindly spiders and demon mice or something. Or what eats spiders?
What is the deal with spiders?
I don't know.
What, wait, you said kindly spiders and demon mice?
I don't know. I'm trying to think of what would eat spiders.
What would eat spiders? A lot of things eat spiders. But I don't know of really anything I would want to write about. I don't think mice eat spiders, honey.
Okay, demon mice then.
Demon mice?
No, I guess that kind of is derivative like carnivorous deer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. You're the creative one.
Well, I know.
I'm just the funny one.
I keep forgetting. Okay. Well. Yeah, so I guess maybe the next story might be aliens. It might not be. It might be just whatever the hell I feel like writing. But for those of you who are listening and are still here with us, if you have a story idea that you would like to share with us, please drop us a line at darkandprecious.com. Make a comment. We actually are on YouTube now, on Buzzsprout, Spotify, Google Play, Apple Music, all that stuff.
All the places.
All the places. We're also on Facebook at Dark&Precious Storytime and dark.n.precious on Instagram. There's a number of ways that you can reach out and drop a line if you have a story idea, and who knows, maybe you'll hear your story idea come to life in the next episode of Dark&Precious Storytime. Until then, I'm Dark.
And I'm Precious.
See you next time.
Bye.